We're officially starting off this journey which might not come to an end and might come to a premature Sudoku of oneself. But first, in one sentence, what was the Epic of Gilgamesh about? Well, the Epic of Gilgamesh is about King Gilgamesh's, and by extension mankind's, fear of death, and by extension fear of nature. But to get deep into the weeds, let me give you a quick rapid-fire summary. The story starts with Gilgamesh being a little too libidinous and thus a harsh ruler, and so the goddess Aruru makes his equal, the wild man Enkidu, out of earth, clay, and divine spittle. Enkidu then comes to fight Gilgamesh, but Enkidu loses, and after that they become the closest of friends, you might say soulmates, and the poem emphasizes companions, which means etymologically to break bread together. And the companionship is a little homoerotic because when they become friends for the first time, they kiss and hold hands. Mwah, fabulous, darling. They then go on a quest to kill the demon Huawa, who is the guardian of the cedar forest. On the way there, Gilgamesh has many dreams, and they are interpreted by Enkidu, who might be Freud in disguise. After killing Huawa, the goddess of love and war, Ishtar, gets the hots for Gilgamesh, but like a true Chad, Gilgamesh denies her. What? Henceforth, the gods decide to punish them and so kill Enkidu with sickness, and he suffers greatly. After Enkidu's death, out of grief and immense fear of death, Gilgamesh goes on a solitary journey past the ends of the earth to gain immortality by finding the survivor of the great flood, Utnapishtim, or Noah. Utnapishtim says to prove himself worthy of immortality, Gilgamesh has to stay awake for a whole week, and as soon as the test starts, Gilgamesh falls asleep. Nevertheless, he is still rewarded with the Flower of Youth, which is not immortality, but in any case is still pretty good. But on his way back to his city Uruk, the Flower of Youth is stolen by a serpent. In the end, Gilgamesh comes back to his city empty-handed, and the whole poem ends where it began. In the end, he has exactly as much as he had at the start. I just realized I was swimming on the wrong settings. No, I quite like this book. I mean, surprisingly enough as well, it's a really easy read, while being pretty good poetry, pretty good narrative poetry. Now this does have to be emphasized that it is David Ferry's, the translator's work. And that's because the original Epic of Gilgamesh is so fragmentary and we don't have all the parts to it. And I mean, it was only found in the 19th century, still relatively early in terms of scholarship. And so David Ferry has done what he can to salvage the original work for us through multiple alleyways of scholarship, and he has poeticized it in English for us to experience as the Sumerians might have experienced it themselves. But at the very first, I must mention how surprising the psychological acuity of it was. I mean, you can see remnants of Anglo-Saxon fairy tales sprinkling throughout in different aspects of them shining through the text, and it makes you wonder just how old are these ideas, are these motifs and themes and these narrative archetypes to us. And so at the end of the first tablet, I mean, I was like this in my dark room. I was like, what the hell am I reading? And so I just want to highlight a strange part in tablet 1 after Enkidu has just been made and a hunter goes out and sees him at a watering hole drinking with all the other wild animals, and you know, he's scared, the hunter is scared by Enkidu because he's a huge giant of a man like Gilgamesh, but his traps that he's been setting, his hunting pits have all been disabled, or the pits have been filled by Enkidu to protect all the animals. And so he goes off and sees Gilgamesh the king and says, "Yo, Gilgamesh, there's this wild man harassing me at work and disabling my career around me. Can you do something for me?" And Gilgamesh the king says, "Yeah, sure, son, I can give you a temple prostitute." And when the wild man sleeps with the temple prostitute, the animals will no longer keep company with him. And so the hunter goes back with this wise woman, the temple prostitute called Shamhat, and points out the wild man, Enkidu, and says, "Look, there he is, girl, do your thing." Because when you do your thing, then the wild animals will no longer keep company with him. There's a lot of symbolic repetition in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And so she does her thing. And then for 7 days, Enkidu in his wonder lay with her in pleasure. And then at last went to seek out the company of the creatures. But seeing him, they fled. And while reading this, I was going, this is so strange. Why would sleeping with a woman make the wild animals with which he accompanied himself before, making them now run away. And evidently, I think to most people, this would seem the mythological equivalent of women giving birth to the consciousness of man, of Eve in the garden, making Adam self-conscious, or in evolutionary terms, the evolutionary pressures that women give unto men, aka sexual selection. And so while reading this, all these things were coming together in harmony, and I was just shocked that this 4,000-year-old poem, the first significant writing that the human race has, is this goddamn deep. And the fact that the hunter's father and Gilgamesh and a temple prostitute all knew that having sex and gaining consciousness would separate him from the wild beasts. I mean, they knew that as well. I mean, how sophisticated can you get? And so I had a little thought. Women are what make men conscious. They are what make them strange loops. They are that which turns the video camera back on the screen to get the eternal recurrence. But where did they get this knowledge from? Now maybe like Eve in Eden, women may have gotten the knowledge from watching endless evil and seeing in the large web of men goodness glimmer just for a moment like a golden apple. And so they began sexually selecting for the, so to say, golden apple. And so it would seem that self-consciousness is an intrinsic part of the feminine spirit, and they themselves have their own positive feedback loops of consciousness, possibly that special kind of conversation that can only be found in the feminine with the feminine spirit. And so it would seem that mythologically at least, women are the teachers of men. And I mean, this can be observed everywhere, from young boys to men in their 30s. They've been acting like an infant for all their years. They're 18, they get into a relationship with a woman, and boom, they change overnight and they suddenly feel like a man, an embodiment of the masculine spirit or closer to it. And it's even more weird that this beautiful, wise temple prostitute, weird group of words, and this wild, hairy-bodied giant of a man basically formed the first mini-story inside the first story of man, because this mini-story is Beauty and the Beast. This is the archetype, the woman civilizing the man. I mean, that's crazy. The first mini-story in the first story of man is Beauty and the Beast. It just keeps getting stranger and stranger. Now to start this section, I'll just read the first page to give us some common ground. Tablet 1. The story of him who knew the most of all men know, who made the journey, heartbroken, reconciled, who knew the way things were before the flood, the secret things, the mystery, who went to the end of the earth and over, who returned and wrote the story on the tablet of stone. He built Uruk. He built the keeping place of Anu and Ishtar. The outer wall shines in the sun like brightest copper. The inner wall is beyond the imagining of kings. Study the brickwork. Study the fortification. Climb the great ancient staircase to the terrace. Study how it is made. From the terrace, see the planted and fallow fields, the ponds and orchids. This is Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, the wild ox, son of Lugalbanda, son of the lady wild cow Ninsun, Gilgamesh, the vanguard and the rear guard of the army. Now the verse is loose iambic pentameter, and it's done in couplets. And I say the main formal motif is poetic repetition, the using of the same phrase in different people's mouths, or from narrative into a mouth, or from mouth into a narrative, to indicate slightly different things, to indicate slightly stranger happenings. I mean, what can be said about the poetry is Lord Byron's phrase, simple and honest verse. This is the embodiment of simple, honest verse. It doesn't mean verse without embellishment or boring verse. It means no insane flights of fancy, no purple prose insights anywhere. Everything is humbly subordinate to the narrative, to the profound truths that weigh the narrative down. And I should say that David Ferry has got gusto in him. I mean, he is a master at subtle word music. I mean, his skill with assonance and consonants. It's just everything you could wish for to be brought upon the first significant text of the human race, I should say. And the first page is a quite nice example of this, because for the first half of the first page, you've got rather constrained, rather softer tone. The overall vowel quality of the first half of the page, as we have seen, even up to he built uruk, is being, you know, u, o, e, o, all of these kind of closed vowels. And then when you get the outer wall shines in the sun like brightest copper, the sound reinforces this intense shining of the sun off the bright walls simply with the use of an open vowel like I coming in at shines like brightest copper. I'll quickly add that David Ferry is also a master at rhythm, because you get this nice flowing river of 6 lines, all one sentence, that suddenly pauses and comes crashing down in the 3-word sentence of he built a rook. I mean, that 3-word sentence crashes down like a waterfall. His manipulation of the sentences is both understated and highly effective. And then later on we get the reverential repetition and rhythm of study the brickwork, study the fortification, study so on and so forth. I mean, it puts you in the mind of reverence, of the same kind of awe you get from looking at those old cathedrals that took hundreds of years to make. Now, concerning character, I was quite surprised with how emotionally fleshed out Gilgamesh and Enkidu were. I mean, we're talking about 2 giants here, I think, that are about 8 feet or 9 feet tall, monuments, mountains of men. And so these almost post-human specimens, Enkidu and Gilgamesh. Well, Enkidu, on his deathbed, on his sick bed, starts to feel the very depths of fear, and fear of death as well. So much so that he also, I think for a moment, begins to resent Gilgamesh, because he feels that through everything Gilgamesh, and this line recurs, this is Enkidu and Gilgamesh's motto, 2 people, companions, they can prevail together. And in the midst of every battle, they cry it out. So death is that one thing where you cannot team up against it. Enkidu feels like Gilgamesh is abandoning him. His very last words are something like, "Why have you forsaken me, Gilgamesh?" And then after that, Gilgamesh is depicted as weeping over Enkidu's body for 7 days and 6 nights. I think it says Gilgamesh floated like an eagle above the body, or as a lioness above its brood. And throughout Gilgamesh's solitary odyssey, it depicts him fearful to the point of constantly weeping, especially when he goes through the sun's tunnel of pure darkness. Through the whole way, he feels such fear that he weeps for miles on end as he gropes through the pitch black. In no other stories in the literary canon do I think fear is shown in its full manifestation ever again. And it's really interesting that the first significant text of the human race should be so filled with fear. But then also, I believe the incipit of the Epic of Gilgamesh on the earliest tablets was the one who saw the abyss, meaning the one who knows the unknown. And the unknown is inherently linked with fear. And so it makes sense that this beginning of consciousness in the Epic of Gilgamesh is drizzled over as if with the source of fear. Okay, the moment of beauty. It comes when Enkidu is laying in his deathbed, full of fear, and he's just had a dream and he's telling the dream to Gilgamesh. That was also page 41. I had a dream. There was a noise in the sky and a noise in the earth in answer. On a dark plain I was alone, but there was one, a man, with a lion head and the paws of a lion too, but the nails were talons, the talons of an eagle. The face was dark. He took hold of me and seized me. I fought with him, I hit at him, but he kept moving about in the dark too quick for me, and then with a blow he capsized me like a raft. I cried out in the dark to Gilgamesh, 2 people, companions, but the man overpowered me and raged like a wild bull over me in glory. and Gilgamesh was afraid and did not help me. Then I was changed into something like a bird, with a bird's arms, as spindly as a bird's, and feathered like a bird. He seized an arm and led me to the dwelling of Urkala, the house of darkness, the house of no return. No one comes back whoever enters there. The garments that they wear are made of feathers. The food they eat is clay, the drink is dirt. Stillness and dust are on the door and doorbolt. There is no light of any sort at all. Dead kings were there, and princes of old kingdoms. Dead high priests and acolytes were there. Dead chanters and anointers, bearers of ointments. Etana was there, and Sumukan was there. And on her throne, Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. And kneeling before her was Belitseri, the scribe who holds the tablet on which the fate of everyone is written. She turned her head and looked at us and said, "Who has led here this latest to arrive?" Now it seems to me, especially with Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, speaking directly to this lion-headed man, and his face being described as dark, and his quickness in the darkness being an attribute of him, to me I think this is Enkidu's shadow taking him into the house of darkness, the house of no return, to the other side, in a sense. Now reading that for the first time, I was totally sucked in, as if into a black hole or some Yeatsian vortex, because it seems so rich and full of meaningful symbolism that goes back before times we can even remember, to primordial times. And I don't have the power to explicate it on the spot, but this passage just feels like sarsaparilla to me. But there's that. Now, one moment of originality. Now this part is right after Enkidu and Gilgamesh kill Huwawa on page 30, and the goddess Ishtar is falling in love with the beauty of Gilgamesh. And they're saying, "Be my lover, be my husband. Quote, give me the seed of your body, give me your semen." Ugh. And she's offering all of these riches to Gilgamesh. And it seems to me here, Gilgamesh is being playfully ironic. Gilgamesh answered and said, "What could I offer the queen of love in return, who lacks nothing at all? Balm for the body, the food and drink of the gods? I have nothing to give to her who lacks nothing at all. You are the door through which the cold gets in. You are the fire that goes out. You are the pitch that sticks to the hands of the one who carries the bucket. You are the house that falls down. You are the shoe that pinches the foot of the wearer. The ill-made wall that buckles when time has gone by. The leaky waterskin soaking the waterskin carrier. Who are your lovers and bridegrooms? Tammuz the slain, whose festival wailing is heard year after year under your sign. He was the first who suffered. The lovely shepherd bird whom Ishtar loved, whose wing you broken, now wing broken cries, lost in the darkness on the forest floor. My wing is broken, broken is my wing. The lion whom you loved, strongest of beasts, the mightiest of the forest, who fell into the calamity of the pits, the bewildering contrivances of the goddess, 7 times 7. You broke the great wild horse and snaffled him. He drinks the water his hobbled hooves have muddied. The goat herd who brought you cakes and daily for you slaughtered a kid. You turned him into a wolf, chased away by the herdsman whose hairy flanks, smelly and mangy, the guardian dogs snap at. You loved Ishulanu, your father's gardener, who brought you figs and dates to adorn your table. You looked at him and showed yourself to him and said, "Now touch me where you dare not, touch me here, touch me where you want to, touch me here." He said, "Why should I eat the rotten food, having been taught to eat the wholesome food? Why should I sin and be cursed, and why should I live where the cold wind blows through the reeds upon the outcast?" Some say the goddess turned him into a frog among the reeds, with haunted frog voice chanting, beseeching what he no longer knows he longs for. Some say into a mole whose blind foot pushes over and over again against the loam in the dark of the tunnel, baffled and silent forever. And you would do with me as you did with them. Now this is another intensely strange part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, because even though these things were done, who would deny the embrace, the full embrace of a goddess? Because just as the temple prostitute started the journey for Enkidu, and without the temple prostitute, Enkidu would be nothing. Gilgamesh's denial of the ultimate feminine goddess, which is symbolically the same as chaos itself, I think. This denial begins Gilgamesh's true journey to try and find immortality. So the catalyst for Enkidu was the earthly divinity of woman, you might say. And the catalyst for Gilgamesh is the denial of the infinite feminine spirit, symbolically representing something like man fully grasping onto his free will and learning how to control himself, and in a sense strive towards immortality through his works, something along those lines. This passage also reminds me of the fact that we've become maybe willfully ignorant in these post-feminist days about how much power the feminine has over the masculine. I mean, these greatest beings, the strongest of all, the lion, the great wild horse, the shepherd bird, these great beings are all taken down by the feminine goddess. Anyway, let's go to the last moment of wisdom on page 65. Now, this might not blow you out of your seat, but I put this here because this is partly made up of proverbs of the time, and the time was the 27th century BCE. I mean, can't even fathom how long ago that was, in a sense. And this might also be potentially the first profound meditation on death. And this is spoken by Utnapishtim, which is aka Noah. Now he's somewhat admonishing Gilgamesh for his want of immortality. But Utnapishtim says, "You who were born the son of a goddess mother, why do you grieve because of a mortal father? How long does a building stand before it falls? How long does a contract last? How long will brothers share the inheritance before they quarrel? How long does hatred, for that matter, last? Time after time the river has risen and flooded. The insect leaves the cocoon to live but a minute. How long is the eye able to look at the sun? From the very beginning nothing at all has lasted. See how the dead and the sleeping resemble each other. Seen together, they are the image of death. The simple man and the ruler resemble each other. The face of the one will darken like that of the other." I very much like this because this, in some senses, begins the literary tradition's long meditation of death. And here it begins laying the most stable groundwork, the most stable foundations that you could ask. And the one that struck me most in my belly was, how long is the eye able to look at the sun? I mean, comparing life to staring at the sun makes this uncanny sense, because life is like a light that goes out, thank you Macbeth, and it can only rage for so long. You can only sustain the staring for so long. It puts me in the mind of Epictetus. I must die, but must I die weeping? No, Epictetus, just stop looking at the sun, then you'll stop weeping. And so the bow score. I mean, for a first text, the progenitor text, you couldn't ask for something better. I mean, it's got everything that a scholar could want and that a regular human being could want, except virtuosic beauty, but that comes later with Homer. So to me, it's a 4 out of 5. You know, it leaves me with a warm feeling in my belly that everything's going to be all right in some sense. You know, a part worth memorizing could be those very proverbs because they give you such a fruitful basis for meditation. But my favorite, how long is the eye able to look at the sun? That gives me so much peace. So again, our linear agon. What does that mean? The battle between the Epic of Gilgamesh and now Machiavelli, the gladiatorial ring that I set up right here. Machiavelli beat Camus, now Gilgamesh beats Machiavelli. Right, it's getting late, kind of tired, but this has been fun. If you got this far, thanks for watching. I'm kind of happy. Like if you are too. Subscribe if you want to sustain that happiness. And comment to tell me why you're not happy. Or you are. I don't know. This is